Howdy. This is Mission Texas.
A political podcast about winning Texas by 2032, or else we may lose the White House for a generation.
I'm one of your hosts, Alex Clark.
And I am Kate Rumsey.
Other podcasts may focus on the day-to-day or the next election, but we are keeping the eyes of Texas on the bigger prize. What happens after the next census?
All right, welcome. On this episode, we're going to explore where Texas Democrats have been, where they're going, and what it will take to build long-term winning movement. And maybe we'll do it with a little help of talking about the Marvel universe. For example, where are we in the Marvel timeline if Texas Democrats were going to win? Welcome to the podcast, my friend, my former mentor in a campaign school, Cliff Walker. Welcome.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Alex. Great to be with you.
Well, I wanted to just start off by asking you if we're talking about Marvel, because I know you're a Marvel fan. What's your origin story? How did you get involved in politics? Because what I imagine is that I and other people know about you having seen all of your involvement in the state, but maybe our listeners and the average voter has not. And I don't know what analogy that would be in the Marvel universe. I'm trying to think of one. We'll think of one as we go, but can you tell us a little bit about your origin story?
Sure. And thank you for indulging my campy nerdiness. Uh, you know me very well,
We love
Kate.
campy nerdiness. We love it.
Well, you're in luck. Stay tuned. I'm originally from San Antonio, Texan through and through. Uh, Grew up as kind of a smart ass kid, and early on when I was young, I would get into these very robust arguments with my parents, not necessarily about me wanting to do things that teenagers like to do that get teenagers in trouble, but about ideas of policy and the state of the world, et cetera. And I thought I had it all figured out because my parents subscribed to basic cable and I had too much access to C-SPAN. Uh, so it got me into a sort of politically minded uh, sense of things early on as a youth. At some point, I thought I was going to be an historian. I ended up studying political science. And then after leaving school, I bummed around for a bit to try to figure out exactly how I wanted to fit into politics. And I caught wind of this candidate who was running for governor, or I'm sorry, who was a governor rather, and was running for president, named Howard Dean. And he was the from the more progressive wing of the party. He said that he was running from the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party, I think was the language we used at the time.
Can I interrupt you just for a moment and just
Yeah.
say for our younger listeners who have seen Chappelle's show, this is the guy who does the and it's really unfortunate because that's how he became kind of defined, but he's so much more of a substantive candidate. And I want you to kind of explain why you were inspired by that campaign, because the more I've learned about him, the more I think he got a raw deal with that whole thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's amazing that back in 2004, we thought it was disqualifying to be president to utter a little yelp of enthusiasm on stage. And that single act was disqualifying. Little did we know the bar would sink so much lower. But I was there that night, actually. I was inspired, like a lot of young folks from across the country, to bus to Iowa, not to necessarily caucus, as I think was the slur at the time. Oh, these kids are coming in and they're going to hijack our caucuses and steal our election. But I was inspired to go knock doors and a frigid temperature for a San Antonian in Des Moines, and make the case that there has to be a way to capture greater attention for us as Democrats and attention of the energetic cohort of voters within our coalition. Right, that's what really attracted me to the governor. His plain spokenness about the Iraq War, about the state of healthcare, and just I hate this word is just so, I think maybe a little overused at the moment, but authentic. There didn't seem to be a lot of distance between what I was seeing from him on the screen and then what I imagined that he is like in real life. Um, So yeah, I bust over to Iowa, was there on election night when he gave his famous speech. I remember being about 20 feet away from him. Earlier that night, we'd seen the results come in, and we thought we were going to win the Iowa caucuses maybe 2 weeks before the election, 3 weeks before the election. And then he just plummets in the polls because the other candidates are like, there's no way, heck, we're going to let this guy become president over us. So the place is like a morgue, not literal morgue, but everyone's weeping. All these young people from across the country thought they were going to win, and we weren't. So Dean comes out and he turns the place into a party. Rolls up his sleeves, and we're going to go here and go to Washington, take back the White House. Yeah, and we're all like, yes, we're going to go to all these places. We're going to take back the White House. Yes, um, but I remember that night looking at the press riser, and you had every major cable news station represented. And I think representing MSNBC at the time, maybe it was CNN, but I think MSNBC was Tucker Carlson. Must have been CNN. And he's holding court. There are all these sad progressives around him, just saying, well, how dare you, blah, blah, blah. And he's just swatting away. And I get my chance up at bat. And my question is, I think the cable news stations had already said it was the worst political concession speech in history. What do you think about that? And he said, well, I don't know if I'd go that far. He's here to like roll up his troops and blah, blah, blah. 24 hours later, he's on cable news. Oh, the guy's in hand. He's a maniac, blah, 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 blah. So long story, to fast forward just a little bit, came back home after going to a lot of these states, hoping that the campaign would reemerge. It did not, but ended up getting work in a congressional office in San Antonio. Ultimately, found my way into state legislative campaigns, into running some PACs, including our state House caucus campaign operation in the 2012 cycle. Helped kick off Battleground Texas as the political director the next cycle, but probably my most formative political experience within the infrastructure was working at the Texas Democratic Party for about 6 years and change, which I did from 2015 to start of 2021.
Yeah.
Look, what I think is really interesting is that we're starting with Howard Dean. He obviously does not become the Democratic nominee in 2004, but he doesn't give up in his spirit of wanting to go everywhere. The kind of enthusiasm that got him disqualified, he took right on into his next role, which was chair of the DNC. I remember he was the chair of the Democratic National Committee from 2005 to 2009. And people had a lot of opinions about what he called a 50-state strategy. But I think is really relevant to what we're trying to talk about in this podcast, particularly because the closest person we've gotten to a statewide win is Beto O'Rourke, and he had a 254 county strategy. Howard Dean had a 50-state strategy, and from 2005 to 2009 was building up the infrastructure. And what happened in 2008? Right? We won a bunch of states that hadn't been on the map, and we haven't won since, really.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, do you draw that same connection between someone who is really invested in the work long term and not counting anybody out and seeing how that lesson can be applied to the state of Texas?
Yeah, I want to be real cautious not to be reductive and say, A is cause B, but I personally do see a through line here. I think that's right. It does two things when you have a 50-state strategy or 254 county strategy, as Beto did in 2018. One, it's an investment in places where a dollar may count a little bit more, right? And two, it is a living example of everybody matters, right? I would be also very clear. If you're a candidate for a statewide office, and let's say you announce, I don't know, November of the off year, so-called off year, and you've got 1 year until the election day, you have a finite number of days, right? So if you have 365 days, including presumably a day or two off, you have 254 counties. That is a major commitment, even if you knock out a couple of counties in the same trip. So I do think there was a strategic question about time spent, but the benefit of it, the uplift of it, is that, you can go to the Democratic convention, as Beto did in 2018, and ask, hey, where are you from? To the largest state convention in the country, which happens to be the Texas Democratic Convention. And everyone just shouts out where they're from, and you can say, I've been there, which I think may have been the best line of that speech. Right? And it is a hard won point. And again, you do have to sort of balance things out in terms of how to use your time strategically. But I think it's a meaningful one.
Well, can I ask, you mentioned that you had spent a lot of time in the party sort of infrastructure. What are all the roles that you had? Because as I remember, you were the deputy executive director at the end. So you rose up
Mhm.
pretty high. How did you start? Like, what were all the different roles you got?
Well, I joined the party specifically because I wanted to work on a project, which had not existed at the party at the time, and really didn't exist in very many state parties across the country. And that was to recruit candidates to run for hyperlocal offices, city
Hmm.
council, school boards, uh, community college, district trustee. These are technically, of course, nonpartisan positions in Texas. But if we're looking to build a broad base of support, urban, suburban, and rural, across all backgrounds, having some measure of support from a party organization, I think, is important. Uh, and to the point about what Governor Dean did as chair, political parties can be a little bit of a black box. I
Hmm.
don't really know what it does. It's really easy to
I still
not
don't know what it
like.
does.
But and that's true for
Oh,
really involved people like Kate and I. But I mean, especially for the audience members who they're not political activists. They don't really consume political media all that often. I mean, we're gonna have to really break it down. Like, try to come at this like a elementary school teacher, right? Like, really break it down for us.
well, I'll dig into it. I'll dig into it. Firstly, just to wrap up this point, because I think this is important. Whatever the party does, and it varies depending upon your state, depending upon the timing, and depending upon campaign finance laws in your state, and a lot of other things. We can get into that some. But one of the most important things that a party organization should do is to deliver some value that people can feel. Right? The candidates can feel that volunteers, organizers, your whole broad apparatus of people who are part of a broader progressive movement, even some of those who don't necessarily want to stamp the Democratic Party on their card. They don't want to have Democrat on their forehead if they're running in a conservative place, for instance, or maybe they're progressive and have determined that they that having a bit of a distinction is important for a reason that they determine. Um, but the party apparatus should be there to provide support. That's the way that we always looked at it. So at some point, and just sort of zooming out a little bit, I think we are currently living under an authoritarian government at the federal level for sure, but it's not new to Texans because we've been under a at least quasi-authoritarian government for years. So now we have multiple layers of authoritarianism stacked. The way out, uh, as I see it, is through some political means, and that means that the opposition party has to perform. I don't see a way for Democrats to win if everyone hates the party, right? Like if Republicans hate the party and the Democrats hate the party and independents are looking, to try to figure out which way to go, or non-affiliated people are looking, and they're like, well, even those people hate them over there. They hate themselves over there, so I don't want to affiliate with that, right? And I think that's what we're seeing in the polls with the party polling at record low levels, right? So finding ways to deliver value was really important, and I'm proud of what I and I'm a I don't say this to be modest. I say this to be factual. A small uh, note in a very extended list of people who are a part of building a really great team that I'm proud to have been a part of.
Yeah, I mean, you were there when we got within 2 points. I mean, we got within 2 points. And I think it was a time in which we thought we are trending purple. We're going to flip the state. And I think you have the best perspective for me in understanding where we've been, because I don't know how I can understand where to go forward if I don't understand how we've gotten here. And you've been so involved, especially within the infrastructure of the party, that it helps me understand, and hopefully our listeners, like what we need to do next. Like, have we progressed? Have we regressed? Like, where were we 10 years ago compared to now? Because if you just look at the data, it seems like we've taken several steps backwards. And maybe that is a causation or correlation with your departure with the party, Cliff, you were there at the top. But can you give us that sense? Like, is there room to say there has been progress within maybe infrastructure, or do we still have ways to go?
So I'll tell you about my time at the party, and I'm mindful that, look, when you work at a party organization, you're a steward of an institution that existed long before, and I mean, long after. So I'm mindful about, I don't want to backseat drive too much, right? My time has come; it is gone. So I'll speak to my time there. When I joined the party, it was because there was a bit of a mindset, and this was under Crystal K. Perkins at the time. Manny Garcia was our also part of our senior leadership team, and these became uh, very good friends. Manny is now a business partner. He rose to become executive director before we left. I was deputy executive director. Tarek Taufik, who is our communications on our communications team at the time, is now a business partner. So it's there were some really tight bonds that formed uh, from that. And randomly, I just talked to Crystal on the phone right before this call on a completely different matter. A little bit of a side note, I guess, but I joined because the party had taken this approach of you know building up a talent base, building up the talent pool, and was open to doing things a little bit differently in order to accomplish that. The party cannot just be a handful of staff in some headquarters somewhere. If that's the party, then we're screwed. The party is, I would argue, millions and millions of Texans. I think arguably over half of Texans who could vote could participate in the vote if we inspire them to vote. I think that is really the party, but the party organization itself, it has to be able to develop and grow to achieve mobilizing the party in full. And it took years to do that. I'll go back actually a cycle before I joined the party in 2014. This was the second election cycle of Gilberto, sort of former chair. And it was, I'm sure as you recall, a very terrible year electorally for Democrats, a lot of headwinds coming our way. Our friend and wonderful human being, Wendy Davis, was our champion, top of the ticket. And, through, I would say, no fault of hers, we landed at a pretty significant margin, right? That said, the party as an organization that year took advantage of a lot of sudden interest in Texas that was, I think, larger than it had been in previous cycles, in part because there was some national folks who were kind of poking around in Texas, organizations like Battleground Texas that I was a part of at the time. So all of this interest is coming in Texas, and that allowed the state party to balloon in size bigger than it had been in my career, right? Which started in let's say 2015, right? So a little over 10 years before then. So you have all of these staff. Now, I wouldn't say that the party was operating on all cylinders quite yet, but at the end of that cycle, we had sort of stretched the concept of what the party might deliver. And when new leadership came in, Crystal, in the 2016 election cycle, Manny as deputy, for some reason, I didn't want the title political director because I really wanted to focus on the local support program. So I made up some title that I couldn't probably even tell you now that was very attuned to the local, but ended up just doing all candidates. So I ended up being political director all the same. But, as a senior leadership team, we set a marker for what we wanted to accomplish in the election cycle. And in 2016, the presidential campaign was not going to put us top of the list. We were not going to, get investment in by any major national committee. So our goal was a single digit state. Our goal was to go from a 20-point margin in 2014 and say we're a single digit state. We're fundamentally a single digit state in 2016. And blessedly, history bore that out. Clinton did lose Texas, of course, but lost it with a margin of, I want to say, 9.69%. So we were a single digit state. So the question is, how can you grow upon that? How can you build upon that? When you have a good tailwind and you know it's going to be a pretty decent election cycle, then how do you turn up the volume, maximize all your wins? Well, you do it by at the start of or soon after the 2016 election by hosting a webinar for anyone who might want to run for office, even if it's hyperlocal offices that are nonpartisan. We had 1,000 people in a GoToWebinar. That's before the big Zoom era. So we were still using GoToMeeting and GoToWebinar. I had to bust the
What
cash.
did y'all do without Zoom? I don't know how you could do that.
The same thing that we do without Google Maps and text and all the things that I don't know how we lived with, back in the day. Um, but somehow we managed, and we did get a record number of people on this call, and then we knew like something is up, right? So how do we talk of Texas and still, do it in a way that is credible? And where we landed was, and declaring that this is going to be the best midterm election of our lifetimes, which we thought was borne out in the research, borne out in our conversations with people. Some of it's just gut intuition, and we were fortunate to that a lot of other people had that same impression, including not just, of course, Beto O'Rourke, but Mike Collier and Lesser Lupe Valdez, who stepped up to run for governor when others had not. Justin Nelson, who also came in with a very narrow margin, under around 3-point margin, narrow statewide at the non-federal level. And then, crucially, a bunch of folks who decided, maybe I'm working for the federal government, but I can't be a part of this administration. I'm going to come over and run for Congress. Or they decided I'm going to run for the state house. And we filled the ballot, every congressional seat contested, all the state Senate seats contested, 90 odd percent plus of the state house seats contested, hitting record marks across the board. As the candidate recruitment person, as much as I love to take credit for it, I say my co-pilot in recruitment was Donald J. Trump at the time, who really helped motivate a lot of people to show up with their name on the dotted line. And all of that was important because Texas is too big for any one individual to carry it. Some may, a lot of folks add a lot of, oomph to the ticket. But it is still a patchwork quilt of support. We still needed a robust Harris County coordinated effort that ensures that folks like Lena Hidalgo and then I want to say 17 African American judges, women judges are elected in that year. We need Colin Olred, who ran in Congressional District 32 at the time, probably the most robust robust congressional volunteer field effort in the state, if not the country. And then a lot of others went far behind. Srico Carney in the Fort Bend area, who was calling with scores and scores of voters into one of the most linguistically diverse districts in the state for sure, and one of the most in the country outside of probably New York, and calling and talking to people in their native languages. We had my friend out Mayor Gina Ortiz Jones running in her first congressional race after her storied career in federal service, and now San Antonio Mayor, my dear hometown. So
And my buddy James Tallarico flipped a Round Rock district. 2018, I think we all kind of understand, was the high watermark for Texas Democrats. But I want to push back on sort of the framing of Kate's question, just gently, to suggest that I think that there are positive signs of progress. I mean, in 2018, which we all acknowledge was just gangbusters year for Texas Democrats, Lupe, God love her, here in Dallas County, did not do very well in her campaign against Greg Abbott. At the same time, like you mentioned, 3 people came within 3 points. even comparing a great cycle like 2018 to a terrible cycle in 2022, Beto still improved that governor's race slot performance from 2018 to 2022.
Mm-hmm.
He lost by 10.9 points, which did not feel good. But again, Lupe lost by 13.3.
Mm-hmm.
So that's progress. We want to talk about even from Mitt Romney to Donald Trump in this last election. We've narrowed the gap from there. And people forget, but Biden came within like 6 points, like 5-point-something points in 2020. Usually, when you talk about a state coming within 5 points, that's a battleground, right? And Cliff, since you used to work at Battleground Texas, and I got one of my first paid political roles there, I think we both have that sort of mindset of like Texas is only going to be a battleground state when we treat it like one, right? And so when you think back to everything good that has happened and everything bad that has happened, what were those kind of key moments where we were treating it like a battleground state in the right kind of way, and what were the missed opportunities? What did we do wrong? Because we're not going to be able to fix it, this long-standing curse, if we can't diagnose where our efforts have fallen short. So how do you see that?
Well, at a kind of esoteric level, I do think it is important to acknowledge the idea of treating Texas like a battleground state. Uh, this is, I don't want to get too frou-frou with it, like clap to make Tinkerbell come back to life kind of thing. But, you gotta
I'm not
believe
above
it.
I'm not above it.
If that's what we need to do, I'm ready to clap.
Yeah. Well, then hurt, right? Yeah, if you start off the election cycle with the presumption that you're going to lose, then you're almost certainly going to be correct. Like, we're not going to stumble our way into a win. And yes, that is at some level, what's in our hearts. I feel like the coach and Rudy. I haven't seen that movie in a long time, so I don't know if that's a good reference, but
I watch it every
like,
year. I'm a Notre Dame grad. Rudy. We even mentioned this with Kendall Scudder in our episode with him. So yeah.
we kind of have to root for ourselves. We have to shout Rudy, even when we don't think we're necessarily the strongest player on the field, or the other team has some built-in advantages or some atmospheric headwinds are coming our way just because of the national climate. But yeah, I mean, you have to believe you're going to win the race until you've objectively lost the race.
Yeah. Hope and
Like,
Change won Indiana, Ohio, Florida, North Carolina in 2008, right?
there you go. There you go. We didn't foreclose on the possibility of winning, right, early on, right? So I do think that's important. At a structural level, this gets back into sort of the black box of what the party and the infrastructure does. But there are some nuts and bolts pieces that I'm all for looking at these things innovatively. I do think this is a period of massive change uh, in how people interact with media, how people interact with politics, and I do think the parties have to adapt. But thinking about what I view as looking across all the tasks, so strategies or jobs, let's say, that a party has to do, and those that it's really, really nice that a party does, especially in a state like Texas, where we don't have a statewide candidate or statewide elected official with an infrastructure. We don't have a lot of national dollars coming in to be the cavalry. What do we have to do to fire on all cylinders? And, I think, Texas 2020 is a good uh, case study and what a party might do when it's doing a whole bunch of stuff. Um, First and foremost, data is a key part of the party's offerings, and it's that sort of the strategic framework of a lot of work that gets done. Uh, a party. I'm sorry, hitting pause just a little bit. The thing that a party has to do, you got to host a primary, you got to host a convention. There's some administrative and compliance things that you need to do just to ensure that candidates appear on the ballots, right? Beyond that, you veer into what's nice for a party to do. It may be necessary for the infrastructure, but by law. The party doesn't necessarily have to do that. It's just really nice for the party to do it. Data is a huge, huge piece. I'd put that top on the list. Um, we were fortunate, and as we evolved the state party from 2014 rather, when the team ballooned in size, to 2016, when we set a high water mark of single digits, to 2018, best midterm, and always reinforcing that this is the highest leverage state in which to do politics. There's this line that we kind of popularized that if you save Texas, you save the country, you save the world. By changing Texas, it does necessarily change American politics. It changes everything. Right? So
That's even more true starting in 2030, right? When we get 4 or 5 new congressional seats.
Post reapportionment, absolutely,
That's what
brother.
I'm saying, yeah.
Absolutely. It is. If it has been true before, it is at least 40% truer after reapportionment, whatever the percentage is. Right? So we use that. I'm going to call it a hype cycle, and this idea that Texas is a place to be excited about, that we're doing really cool shit at the party organization. Parties may have seemed to some kind of older affairs, and you got old and busted versus new hotness, and there's all kinds of newfangled organizations that crop up, and everything fits together, right? And it's not a knock on anything that is not part of the party organization, but the party is a critical piece of it, and they ain't going anywhere. So we thought there was a moral obligation for it to be as good as it could possibly be. Right. So what all can a party do above and beyond the basics? On the data front, we had great data staff before 2014, in 2014 and before, but in the 2016 cycle, we had our first actual quant join our team. Our first actual I can do field math. I can do all kinds of miraculous things in Excel to calculate numbers for doors. I should not be a data director, or I personally should not be, or a CTO or anything like that. But we're able to bring in someone who had a high degree of experience. And then the next cycle, another person joined who had not just data experience, but deep organizational, uh, uh, deep experience and knowledge in just managing organizations. I mean, Lauren Pulley, who became our data director in the 2018 cycle and ultimately our CTO before moving up to the DNC where she is now, truly upskilled our organization across the board. And then herself attracted extraordinary talent who wanted to be part of, unambiguously, the best data team in any state party in the country.
Can I interject here? Because as a candidate, I think this is a great point, especially that Alex is making about where we've been as a party and what we've done to progress. And I know as a candidate, I got access to the data that we had for the voter file, right? And I think that's what you're talking about. And we get into this with Christian Carranza, who the listeners hopefully will have heard from already. But we know when we knock on a door, somebody has voted in a general election, they voted in a primary. This is all public data, so we're not stealing it, but it's data that we know more about to be able to turn out those voters and remind them to vote and hopefully persuade them. And I know that as a candidate, I just called up the Texas Democratic Party, paid a small fee, and I got access to this enormous amount of data that I then can help give to my volunteers. Precinct chairs have access to this data, so they know what their precinct is like who's voting in their precinct. And so I think that is a great example of where we've been in the past decade and what we still have and can build on top of.
Yeah, and if you're hearing this and you're thinking, wait, how do people have my data? I don't know if I like the idea people have my data. To be clear, no one knows who you voted for, just that you showed up and voted in that election. Whether you voted in a Democratic primary or Republican primary, that's public. And whether you showed up to vote at the general election. Who you voted for is completely secret.
Right.
That is absolutely right. The only public bits of the information that that are public are, your name, and your address, and I believe your age, and then whether or not you vote in a Democratic primary, or Republican primary, or runoff election, or general election, or an off year election, whatever the case may be. That's public. I think it's important to share this. There's one thing that we don't know for certain in Texas, and it's because of our history of highly racialized voter election, or I'm sorry, election management in this state. But we don't register by party in Texas, do in other states. And I'll let the lawyers opine a little bit more about that and why. Um, but to be brief on it, for myself, it gets a little hard to figure out like who you're supposed to talk to, right? Like if you're going door to door, in some cases early in the election, you might want to talk to a whole bunch of people who might not necessarily agree with you. But as you get closer to the election and time is scarce, you want to really concentrate on the people who need to hear from you. Because they'll be the first to say, well, no one came and knocked on my door, to hear the issues that I cared about a couple months before the election. So there's a lot of number crunching that goes on. And often that's done at the national level through outside vendors. In Texas, we brought all of that in house because Texas is weird. We're 5 different states mashed up into one. A national model just doesn't work as well for us here. So in 2018, we brought on an in-house modeler who continued to update our targeting models as there were more conversations being had with people at the doors and say, well, what are the messages that are really resonating out with folks, and who's moving in our direction, and can we figure out why, and can we predict who might else move in our direction if we make sure that we have a conversation with those folks.
All right. So Cliff, I feel like something really helpful takeaway that everybody could benefit from what you're just talking about with the voter file. Confirm for me if this is true. If you vote on the first day of early voting, you're removed from the list that candidates are going to go and knock on your door and talk to you because they don't need to waste their time. They need to go talk to the people who still haven't voted. Is this true? And should this motivate people to go vote on the first day of early voting?
You have found the hack.
Okay.
That is a great life hack, great democracy hack there. Absolutely. If you, every candidate is going to be looking to talk to who needs to come out and vote still. So if you come out and vote early, it happens a lot faster than it used to. We should know within 24 hours whether or not you voted in pretty much every county in Texas. Every campaign should update all of their outreach lists and pull you off the emails or at least the text messages, the door knocks, the phone calls, all of these things that we're getting bombarded with at the end of the campaign. Now, if you are getting bombarded, though, that is a sign that something is working, right? We can talk about the tactics that need to evolve, and I 100% agree they need to evolve, but that is a sign of life from a campaign. But yes, we will make sure that we divert those efforts elsewhere if you vote early.
So no promises on the text messages.
The text messages may take a little while for people to update, but
I know. I feel like there's some quantum mania or something, that the loophole that we can create to get us out of that the multiverse where we get all the text messages every day. Which, speaking of, I want to ask the question: if we're on a timeline as Texas Democrats in the Marvel universe, are we at Endgame yet, or are we still back at like Thor 1? Like, what do we got ahead of us? How are we going to take down Thanos? What do we got to do? Where are we at?
Well, my gut is that wherever we are in however many movies it took to get to Avengers Endgame, Thanos is coming. Thanos is here. So we really ought accelerate to get to the point where we've got a fully built out team. I guess you'd ask, who would I be in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? I think I'm probably Nick Fury. Like, I don't think I have any special gifts myself.
You're recruiting, you're behind the scenes. Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not the one, but I'm Morpheus, right? I can recruit people to run for things, right?
Now we're
And that's to mix some franchises there. But that's absolutely right. Like when a party is operating on all fronts, you have the best voter protection director that you have in the country, as we did in 2020. You have the best data team. You have the strongest county party outreach team, candidate outreach team, organizing, which had to pivot entirely to digital organizing. We even had extraordinary convention team, which is not really seen as the key thing for most normal people to be involved in. Texas, again, it is the largest convention in the country. But we had to pivot on a dime because there was another incident that happened. We all got a little quality time with our living rooms in Zooms in 2020. So we had to pivot. And at one point, we're co-planning an in-person convention in San Antonio and then a virtual convention that had never been done before, where the DNC was in our Slack messages and Signal messages to track and sort of figure out how you do this thing, right?
Hmm.
So you can't do that without a quality team. We have too many freaking people in this
Yes.
beloved state, and it takes an extraordinary number, not a huge number. By the time we wrapped in 2020, we had about 250 people on the payroll. But you have a core team of, I forget exactly how much, but 40, 50 people. Uh, it takes a large number of people who are truly committed. This is hard, grueling, often thankless work. And you have to outperform. You can't just come in. No disrespect to some of our other friends who are running other state parties across the country. You can't be par. You have to be the best. It's Texas. It's the most bedeviling political problem in the country. Single party control of one state, either side, any state, either party. Texas has the longest streak right now with full Republican dominance. So if we're going to get our way out of that mire, we can't just be good. We have to be the best, and we've got to build back up to that.
So when you were talking about just having top talent, especially you referred to a quant, right? Help the audience understand what that allows you to do, like functionally. Like, what does that look like in terms of what the party is able to accomplish, as opposed to having someone who's just kind of good at math and Excel?
uh, Great question. So at the baseline level, you're maintaining the database that every candidate who pays a modest fee, which we always kept low. We never raised it during our time. My business partner now, Manny Garcia, and my time at the party, and the chairman. And in many cases, we lowered it. But you pay a modest fee, you get access to the list of voters within your district and the platform that you can use to pull those lists into call sheets, into knock lists, into text messaging lists, etc. That's at the basic level. That's called the Voter Activation Network. It's a nationally available tool for Democrats across the country. When you advance to the next tier, now you're doing model building. Now you have a Texas specific model that predicts two things: the likelihood that you are to come out and vote from zero, not at all, to 100, absolutely. So that way you can really focus in on people who are maybe a little less likely to come out and vote unless they hear from somebody. And that's called a return turnout model. And then a partisanship model, where you're again going from zero to 100 in a probabilistic way, where you're where you're determining, zero, not necessarily probabilistic, right? I'm sorry, but a rank order way. Zero, you're unlikely to come out and vote for a Democrat if you do vote. And 100, you're absolutely going to come out and vote for a Democrat. And that can be attuned to voting for a candidate. It can be attuned to voting for state party, national party, a bunch of other things. We did it for Texas Democrats. So let us do a few things. Identify the people who maybe need a little bit of a nudge to come out and support a Democrat, and then to come out at all, right? So that's another sort of tier of support. Going beyond that, we produced dossiers essentially for every candidate, profiles for any candidate who wanted it for every district. We could do any district that's partisan. So congressional, state senate, state house, county commissioner, countywide, of course. And that profile gave you certain goals that we would ask you to reach as a candidate. Some candidates are running in very upside down districts for Democrats. If you're in a district that's 20% Democratic and you're running against a Republican who's been there for however long, there was this real structural disadvantage, and candidly, you're just unlikely to win that district. But You might still be in a state house seat, which may not be a target, but it's still 150th of the state. So we need to maximize Democratic support, and you're the most compelling Democratic messenger in that district. It's not going to be me. I live in Austin. I'm from San Antonio. What do I have to say to someone who's running Texarkana or in Abilene or wherever, right? You hear from someone local. That's a representative of the Democratic Party. It's not someone nationally or Nancy Pelosi or whatever. These folks, it's your local person. So what are some goals for them? How many voters can you register? And where generally do they live? How many people are eligible to vote by mail in Texas if you're 65 or up? Or have a disability, you can vote by mail. If you're going to be out of county at that time, it's a little harder to predict. Right? But here's our general estimate of those folks who could. Who are the people who are in that list of folks that we need to identify, whether they support Democrats or Republicans? I mean, it's not even persuasion necessarily, it's identification, right? So and here's a list of people you can text. Here's basically a roadmap to maximize Democratic support in your district. And if there's a path of 50% plus one or majority in that district, fantastic. That's a run to win district. If there's not, that's a run to build district. And they're both important. And we need to support both. And the data team that we had, the sophistication of it allowed us to be able to produce this kind of guidance for any candidate we wanted. And the last thing I'll say, this is a little less, maybe a little higher level, 30,000 foot, but there are a lot of political players in this whole mix, right? There are organizations who are well funded, who have their whole theory of the case. And sometimes they agree with the party and sometimes they don't. You have national groups who kind of dip in and dip out, right? When you have a really strong data team at the party, it also gives you a lot of strategic trust among partners. And that allows us to be more cohesive and coordinated as a whole, right? Coordinate to the extent that you can compliantly coordinate by law, right? But if and where you can, people should say, you know what? The path that's been outlined by the party makes sense for me. I don't need to draw my own path. And maybe it runs counter, or maybe it's duplicative of what the party is doing or what others are doing. But I have a general sight on what's happening in the whole puzzle, this jigsaw puzzle of all the, 1/3 of congressional seats that are contested and the 1/3 of state house seats and the county programs that are running. And now we can look at the jigsaw puzzle as a whole and fill in gaps and make sure that we maximize our lift. You can't do that unless you have really smart, very deeply trusted data team.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful, and I think it can be really beneficial to understand where all the pieces on the board are as you're trying to play this really complicated game. But I do wonder, in addition to that, if there is some necessary playing outside of what is known. And I think about this anecdote about the Barack Obama Iowa win that surprised everybody. My memory of it, because I was a senior in high school, Sherman High School, intern for the Obama campaign. Not a very popular position, actually, in Sherman, Texas. But in Iowa, my understanding was that Barack Obama was polling third, that he was behind John Edwards, who had invested tons of money in scoping out all the data to the point where they knew like what magazines every voter read, what kind of soda they drank. They knew everything there was to know about every voter in Iowa. And that Barack Obama just found and turned out so many people who had never voted before at all that he not only came in second, but he won Iowa and changed the entire narrative of the race. And so I wonder sometimes if we get kind of stuck thinking about what's possible based on what we know, instead of wondering, what about this huge slice of people who are registered to vote already, but don't show up and vote?
Mm-hmm.
Like when I always love the graphics that Michael Lee puts together at the Brennan Center. It says blue, red, but then here's this giant green slice that's registered but doesn't vote. So kind of going back to the beginning of the podcast, like the Rudy chant, the hope. How do we build that into the party's DNA to where Texas isn't this losing mindset group of people who have decided that the outside of the race that we're going to lose?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, how do we get rid of the loser stink that uh, we may have acquired, may have picked up along the way? So I got a couple hot takes. I'm gonna weave all this together. This is my personal gut. Um, there's a lot of debate right now in the Democratic Party about whether Democrats along the spectrum, some spectrum, to the left, to the right, or center, or whatever you want to call it, there's a lot of oxygen, energy that's spent in this great debate. Um, I call a lot of this, not to say that there shouldn't be some retrospection and that there's not room for it, but there's a lot of very public debate about this. I call this the meta message, right? If you think about the party as all of the messaging entities associated with us. So that's the elected officials, the candidates, the party leaders themselves, like precinct chairs and county chairs, volunteers, operatives. Let's throw in the 501c4 progressive apparatus, the C3 aligned civic apparatus that codes is a bit more progressive, pundits on TV. The output from all of these things, all of these entities are what people are experiencing. And they don't really disambiguate between Democratic Party, this group, that group, whatever. It's just sort of the left, or maybe they don't even have a name for it. It's just those folks, right? When you look at the output from that megaphone that I just described, a percentage of it is spent critiquing the remainder of the output of that megaphone, right? So, what percentage of all of the stuff that we talk about on cable news and political conversations at the dinner table, all of that is spent saying about what Democrats ought to do? Well, what I think we ought to do is this and the other, right? So, I call that the meta message. And you really got to be deep in the weeds to care about the meta message, right? Like we care about the meta message. Normal people are like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, why are you? I mean, it is the most obsessive form of navel gazing, right? And it really contributes to the whole idea that we don't even like ourselves. So why would I join this team? A party, lowercase p implies a good time, right? It doesn't sound like a good time. We're not a good hang, right? So one, I would say, I think the meta message is actually destructive. And again, it's not to suggest that there shouldn't be any critiques of anyone with all within the party apparatus, but there's been a lot of attention paid recently on the concept of attention, on the attention economy. And it is a scarce commodity, it is a scarce gift, it's a currency of life. And if someone gives you their attention, then you should really do something very special with it, something worthwhile. And what we often do is spend the hard won attention that's harder by the moment to capture, right? Like Netflix knows this. They know that their competition is video games and sports and any way that you spend your waking hours, right? The private sector gets this, that attention. We're trying to capture a little bit of it and optimize it so that we can flip it and convert it into a buck, right? Through advertising or whatever. If and when we're able to capture it, if we waste it or spend a considerable amount of our time wasting it with just self-loathing and self-flagellation, it doesn't really endear people to us. Well, you might hate me, but I hate me too. Well, that doesn't make the other person hate me less, right? So, so I think that's a huge, huge waste. And I think we should dial down the meta message considerably and focus on actual communicating. And what the message is, let the people decide, right? Like there are a bazillion kinds of candidates who I'm hoping are going to be running. I think there are going to be a lot of incumbents getting primary challenges, right? I think there are going to be 1,000 flowers blooming. They're messengers across varying social networks, Twitter, Substack, if you want to read something in depth. what I do personally is if I don't like a take and I don't think it really makes a lot of sense, I just don't promote it. And if I do like something, then I circulate it. So I'm contributing to crowding out the message that I think is a little less productive through my actions. And if we all agree as Democrats, then the message that is the most resonant is going to be the one that lifts it, that rises to the top. This is the last thing I'll say. I think it's important because I don't think people are moderate per se, not the way that we envision. I don't think they're centrist. I think very few people are looking at all of the issues. Let's say you're running for the state legislature. They're looking at the varying committees, dozens of standing committees in the House on all of the various issues and saying, okay, well, what is
Veterans
this person saying
affairs,
here? What is
insurance. Yeah.
public education, higher education, international trade, etc. Where does this candidate stand across all these issues? I'm going to make a chart, and then I'll just come down to whichever one makes the most sense for me. Like, no, it doesn't. It's like a
Yeah.
gut level of like, I think this person's looking out for me. They seem to kind of like get where I am. Maybe that's some shared life experience,
Yeah.
right? So I don't think people are moderate or ideological in that way. I think they're largely just not paying a whole lot of attention and haven't really fleshed out kind of what they think. And I think that is, as you described, a lot of people who are registered who maybe don't vote because like it seems like a whole rigmarole. There's a lot of people fighting. I don't get it. I'm intimidated by it. It's a
Yeah.
lot to understand, right? So like, how can we just put forward enough messaging? And I use message as a verb, which is something I dissuade people from doing, right? But how can we put out enough communication to catch someone's attention to just convey, hey, there's a lot of issues out there, but I know you really care about this. I clock that. That's important to you, therefore it's important to me. Here's what we're going to do about it. And let's just be in touch. And I'm
Yeah.
compelling enough for you to tune into my next thing that I host. All right. I think that's our goal, and our campaigns really should be oriented on that framework.
Yeah, I was thinking if we were to give an action item to Texans, because I think a lot of what our podcast is about is giving transparency and answers to people. Like everyone's asking me, Kate, what can I do? What's the plan? Is there a plan? I'm like, I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out. That's why I'm starting this podcast. And I was thinking if I were to add something, it would be we all need some amount of messaging discipline that, like to your point, that we need to hone in on what we can offer to people and not just, as you're saying, navel gazing. And I also think in that vein, it's the you know, pointing the finger at the other side and saying how hypocritical the other side is, like, because the other side will just point it right back and say, well, your guy was hypocritical too. And it just keeps, going back and forth. And my thought is we need some amount of discipline and messaging to say, this is what we stand for as Democrats. This is what we can offer you going forward. So do you have any other action items like that you would say, okay, Texas, this is what I would recommend you do right now?
Okay, I'm so glad you said that because I feel like that's exactly where I was going with it. Was what Cliff said was such like a good word that we all need to hear sometimes, especially as Texas Democrats, is that rather than engaging in the meta message, people who are being downers and just constantly negative about what's wrong is like, don't feed the algorithm with your comment on that, right? Don't share their content. Like, let's focus on the positive. Let's focus on the joy. Let's focus on the progress that we have made. Like, we have made a lot of progress, and this is going to be a great cycle for Texas Democrats. And if someone wants to have a conversation by themselves about how Texas Democrats are doomed to failure, they can go have that off by themselves. We don't need to help them with that at all. But yes, Cliff, if you have any other kind of takeaway action items, please lay them on us.
If there is to go back to our Marvel Cinematic Universe metaphor, if there's one I want to channel right now, I think it's Ant-Man. I think our solution is more Ant-Man than Hulk. Look, we got some great folks running statewide. I like some. Being at the party, it's so unusual because, of course, you got your feelings and thoughts about folks, but you administer the primary, so you have to always be, assiduously neutral. And now, for the first time in a very long time, I get to have opinions about things. So I got, yeah, it's a new world. But yeah, great folks at the top of the ticket. I still think it comes down to people who represent the party to local folks. People are unashamed to be affiliated with the Democrat. Like I get it. Like some people aren't joiners. I want to join a thing. That that's okay. I mean, I honestly, I think it can be a a practical decision and shared as such. Look, I got some areas of agreement. I got some areas of disagreement. I don't know if I'd full out call myself a Democrat, but here's why I'm going to be voting for these Democratic candidates, and here's why. Um, I accept, and I think we should wholeheartedly accept folks who are at that place within our coalition, whether it's because they are more progressive, because they're more conservative, right? But we need vocal instances. The problem we have is volume right now. It's not that we don't have that someone is not uttering a good message as a Democrat somewhere. Like at this very moment, there's some Democrat in some place in the United States of America who's delivering like a pitch perfect message for that audience that he's talking to or she's talking to. Right. That said, um, we just need to turn up the volume. You can have a perfect song, but if the volume's too low, then what does it matter? We're a little bit of a tree falling in the forest of meta message right now. Right? So adopt a candidate at any level. I love local campaigns. If I'm a first time volunteer, I always encourage someone to do. If I'm a first time candidate, my biggest piece of advice is to get a list of voters, go door to door. You might want to pull the most extreme voters based on the model on the other side, because I'm mindful of comfort and safety, and you don't want to be, going around terrifying.
So fun when somebody hates you at the door. It's great.
So wait, real quick before we lose the thread, is the Ant-Man connection that we're going to be giving our PIM particles to amplify
right.
the pitch
Are
perfect
we
messages?
Small Ant-Man or big Ant-Man?
We're
Giant
not
Man.
giant man. We are Ant-Man here. So we are assembling what often overlooked, thought to be too small to make a difference, campaign and candidate out there. And the assemblage of them are powerful. It seems a little, and as I'm saying this, I feel corny as I'm saying this, but I genuinely believe that there's something called the uptick effect. If you're running for local office, you're out there knocking doors. Perhaps the higher folks hiring folks up the ballot are not personally knocking a door, making a personal connection with someone, spending 20 minutes at a door. When that candidate leaves, the voters tells their spouse or whatnot, "Hey, can you believe it? Someone who's running for office came and talked to me for 20 minutes. I don't know what I believe, but I'm gonna go vote for that person because they asked me, right?" And you you you've run for office and you've talked to voters at the door. That is a meaningful, big experience for people to experience their democracy in action in that way, right? So I think doing that writ large, I'm for knocking more doors. I'm for in person over virtual. Not that virtual isn't important. This idea that culture is downstream or politics is downstream of culture, which is attributed to Andrew Breitbart, but I think probably more associated with more progressive minded folks. I think there's some truth to that. And we do have to communicate across all channels. We don't have the luxury of picking one thing over another. I'm sorry, we have to do it all. Right? The only solution is all of the above. But I don't want to neglect starting early. There's no time to. There's no time like the present. Starting early, talking to people face to face, in small gatherings, in house parties, at the door. Again, if I'm a candidate running for the first time, I tell people you take the 10% most uber MAGA folks. Maybe it doesn't make sense to talk to those folks, but talk to literally everyone else and just go and say, look, I'm considering running for office. Look, I got opinions on stuff, happy to talk about it, but I'm curious about what you think. What do you care about? You're running for the state house where you're going to hear about that pothole, right? And some other candidate might come by and say, give the people a civics lesson. Well, that's actually a city council person. That's what you're supposed to do. But you're listening to what you actually care about and what do you actually need, big or small, right? So I encourage every candidate. You're going to poll and do all these things, try to understand the electorate. You get a fingertip feel not just of what people care about because they tell you, but how they talk about it. And I don't think there's anything that really compares to that. That's my big piece of advice for first-time candidate. But adopt a local campaign. If you've not done it before, the localer, the more you'll get to experience.
Yeah.
And
the difference that you'll make, because the statewide candidates have tons of volunteers and money, but the local school board or city council member, or like me running for state house, I don't have, I had my parents and cousins, and you can make a huge difference on a local campaign, and I know because I did it. But all right, Cliff, we've had you for long enough. So grateful for you, and I always feel better when I talk to you. You're the person I call every time I've got a big thing that I'm doing and I need some advice. You've been there for me always. So I really appreciate you, friend. But I don't know if Alex has any more questions, but the way I've always have been ending this is just asking you, if people want to follow what you care about or you online. I know you're not a big social media guy, but if they want to follow you, where do they find you? And then also, other than Marvel watching, what do you got going on outside of politics?
What do I have going on outside of politics? Well, first, this is a little bit as I say, not as I do situation, because I encourage people to talk across all their channels and to communicate with volume. And I'm just not built that way. I'm not a big Instagram or Facebooker, et cetera. But if there's one social platform that I use, it's LinkedIn. I got a lot of friends who are in this community who are often looking for positions. So I'm trying to lift those up as much as possible, and the work of my friends as well. So that's what I'm most active at. Cliff Walker on LinkedIn. I'm on the others, but I'm not active. So heads up.
I think it's completely fitting that the Nick Fury of Texas Democratic politics says, "Find me on LinkedIn," because I'm gonna be assembling a team of talent, and that's where the talent gathers. Okay, I think that's great.
I'm giving all my secrets. The thing I'm excited about is last week, the Seeker Strategies team, my company, we launched a new sister company called Seeker Studios, soft launch. So we screened a movie by a dear friend of ours who's also a filmmaker, a movie called The Portrait of a Postman, the story of, everyone's familiar with Hermes, luxury brand. Hermes is famous for its 3-foot by 3-foot scarves, which are very designer. There's one American designer in the history of Hermes, and it happens to be an African-American postman who lives in Waco, Texas. So it's a movie about his story, and it's fascinating. So we hosted this event. We rented out the State Theater in downtown Austin, had a couple hundred of our best friends come by, and launched what's going to be the start of a production studio for documentaries about Texas, the stories that often go untold. Setting aside the meta message, focused on really putting a spotlight on people who others can see their stories in and feel motivated to act. Yeah, very excited about that.
That's so great. Congrats. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. This has been a great time. Another Marvel line. I could do this all day.
That's right.
I could do this all day. Nice one. I like it. All right. Well, that ends this episode. Thank you, Cliff. We will see y'all next week, and God bless Texas. You can follow us on all socials at Mission Texas Podcast. Email us at missiontexaspodcast@gmail.com. This episode is edited by Juan Jose Flores. Our music bumper is by Adam Pickerel, and our cover art is by Tina Sohn.